Hello, my name's Richard Diver, and I'm joined by my colleague Rin Ewer, author of the SOC Process Framework. This is video 3 of an 8-part series. So in this video, we're going to cover incident response framework and procedures. We do recommend that you actually follow along with this. So if you haven't done so already, pause the video, go open up the workbook in your Azure Sentinel instance, and then come back and join us again. All right, hopefully you are back now. So Rin, I'm going to be learning on this journey along with our audience. So let's talk about this section, and let's start with, how did you get this developed in the first place? I know you've been working on this for some time, right, with your experience.
Yeah, we developed this because we had a lot of customers asking us about how to operationalize the tooling within Sentinel and our other tools within any SOC operations. I've helped to build SOCs within internal Microsoft and understand some of the processes and procedures that it takes in order to skill up, the human side. The analysts understands what those skills are, the process and procedures that they need to snap to, and then the tools that they need to skill up on so that they can bring all of those pieces together. And that's really what this is it's that culmination to really kind of help them be able to envision and see these pieces come to bear for them and for their career and for their day-to-day jobs.
Excellent. So some real deep dive information based on real life experience. That's what we always like to hear. Yeah, I think it's a really good resource. As we've discovered in the first couple of videos, if you followed along with us so far, we're really now going to go deeper and deeper into this. So time to roll up your sleeves. A couple of things that we want to make sure we cover as we go through this, Rin, just to keep in mind, is I know that our audience is hopefully going to be a mixture of some of our customers that are using Azure Sentinel directly. I've been a consultant before, so we're going to definitely appeal to the consultant that's going to take this workbook, come to some of our customers and help them understand how to implement it. There's also another audience that we consider as well, which I work with quite a lot, which is our managed services providers. And we see more and more instances of Sentinel being managed by a partner. And so we'll look at, again, just as you're talking through it, walk me through and explain it. We'll try to consider how that might be done in different scenarios.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think you're absolutely right. I think, I too have been a customer before coming to Microsoft. Right. I've, had to deliver joint delivery, both from internal and external teams, bringing those pieces together, and then really kind of understanding how to bring in, say, like you called out, the managed service provider that is providing a managed service that a lot of our customers are leveraging today because of how small they are on the security operations side. And that's okay, no matter what it looks like for you and for your line of business. There is no wrong answer. What the right answer though is that you're doing something, that you're taking a look at what your operations is today, and you're trying to be better, today than you were yesterday, and again, better tomorrow than you were today. That really is the right answer, is so that anything that you can deploy, that anything that you can put into practice that makes you better and helps you become more mature, that's really what we're after, no matter what your size or your state of operations looks like. So today we really kind of want to dive into the incident response framework. You can see that that's what I have highlighted here, and this is the framework. And then the incident response procedure that snaps to this framework. The procedure is a breakdown of this framework, and we call out each of these areas in their respective sections. So we're going to be spending a lot more time during this session diving into just this portion of the workbook, giving you a lot more clarity around each of the sections and how they pertain to the things that, Richard, you just called out as a customer, joint delivery, and as a managed service provider. So let's dive in.
Yeah, it was like a good diagram. Let's get started with that.
All right, so we have here different sections. So let's start with this first section, watching and monitoring. Under the watching and monitoring section, you may have analysts that are using the live stream capabilities of Sentinel. And they may take those live streams and they may elevate them into a detection, some type of analytic that's going to give us a response when that analytic fires. And that analytic can then fire into an incident, or you could have multiple analytics that fired into an incident and drive that, depending on the type of cadence that you want and the way that you're thinking about that incident response process. Okay, and so that's really where these events of interest come into play. So we're looking at events of interest. Those events of interest are mapped back to a detection or to a live stream, and we're crafting that out. It may also be, mapped to network operations, any forensics or threat intel data, any other data that we're bringing in, both first party or third party. All of this allows us to really kind of match the watch and monitor phase of our incident response framework here. So that's kind of what we're doing, is we're just setting the stage. It's the foundation piece to any good diagram that we now know, okay, we've got that foundational piece. Now let's do something with that. And that's where we step into the investigation phase, right? And this investigation phase could be where an MSSP takes over. And so they may be watching and monitoring, and they may be doing the initial triage. They may be looking at whether or not these incidents are of note. And if they need to go and add additional evidence, go gather more data, build out bookmarks. They may need to go gather and do other type of investigation to add the type of artifacts and evidence that supports the investigation that they're doing. But that's really where the investigation phase kind of comes into play. And so you can imagine that you may have a local analyst that is, diving into the investigation portion, or you may have an analyst working jointly with an analyst from an MSSP, right? A managed service provider that's providing, and they're working together on that investigation phase, right? Where the analyst in-house has some tribal knowledge, right? Or operational knowledge that the managed service provider does not have. And so they're working together to understand what type of triage procedure they need to leverage, what type of severity, that they need to apply. Do they need to gather more information, or can they work to resolve, right? What do they need to document, update, and provide within the shift logs? Do they need to do a knowledge transfer between the analyst within the managed service provider to anyone that is in-house to the business that is working this incident? What does that look like? And then determining that scope of impact, where if that scope falls beyond the skills of a managed service provider because of there's tribal knowledge that's needed, right? We may need to pull in additional resources. And so depending on how that line of business has their incident response process mapped out, they may pull in an incident response team, or they may pull in an external team that has additional operational knowledge around that asset, that artifact, around the type of services, hosts, identities, so on and so forth, that were triggered at the time of incident. And so that's really what this framework is doing, is it's really kind of giving any one of you an idea around where you may fit into this model, right? Just because it's not necessarily called out in the diagram doesn't mean that you can't snap to it, right? Because an MSSP could certainly fit into this area at a high level from an analyst perspective, looking at it holistically across a business, and then knowing when they need to dive deeper with someone that is internal in the house, right? That has that additional knowledge around the thing that they're investigating.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense, Rin. I see that when our partners are getting opportunities with customers to do this outsourcing, a lot of the times it is either the 24/7 monitoring because the customer has a set of experts inside the business, but they don't want to work 24/7. And so this is the first line here, is they do the triage before you get somebody out of their bed. And I've been that person. You get woken up at 2 a.m, it needs to be something that's severe that you should be attending to. The other side is maybe they have 24/7 monitoring, but what they don't have is the deep expertise. And so that's another one where their 24/7 team can handle the ticket generation, but they should do some kind of analysis before they decide to call out the experts, which might be on a billable charge or an hourly rate, etc. And so, yeah, certainly see the flow so far. Cool.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Right. They're thinking about it from, that monitoring 24/7 side of the house. And now I've got, someone I've got to wake up, and that may work. That actually kind of leads us into our next section, which is the mobilize section, where they either are calling an incident response team that fits that line of business, or they're calling an external team that has that tribal knowledge, right, to help them with the driving of the incidents to a resolution. So this section here really is where we are looking at we're looking at a couple of things here. We're looking at that mobilize, and we're looking at that assess and contain. So that external team with that knowledge of the line of business can determine the right containment and mitigation methods. That's really what they're there to do, right? Because they've got the right kinds of information around the apps and services and the infrastructure that we're monitoring and that we're alerting on, but they own those apps and services and that infrastructure. They're the owners to this. And so we don't want to cause any harm or disruption to any of those services, especially any of those services that may be a line of business related where it's revenue generating. We want to be very cognizant of that. And so snapping business models to this is so imperative for anyone adopting this type of framework, that they understand where those pieces interconnect to not do any harm. It's why it's so important that we're bringing in external teams, we're partnering with them, and we're letting them kind of drive the type of response that we need and drive the type of remediation that's applicable around that, assess, contain, and mitigation methods. We want them to partner with us, and we want them to have a voice. That's critical. It's important. The other piece there then is to have them provide that direction, right, and help us gather any additional evidence and factual information that may need to be added within Sentinel under bookmarks. Bookmarks is a great way to gather that additional evidence and then link it through the entity mapping back into our incident graph. So now that we can kind of see how those pieces, just because they didn't show up in the initial alert, doesn't mean that they're not there, and doesn't mean that we shouldn't be including them during our investigation. But someone like an external team can be helping the SOC team or a managed service provider that's partnered with someone internal to help drive to that type of knowledge and resolution. So this is all important and part of that.
That's great. I think when I think of this, some of the things that come to mind are, as you go through carrying out an investigation, you make notes, you do some steps, and we're going to cover a lot of where do you put that information, where do you get it from, because somebody may have already done it before and they know how to look at Linux versus Windows or Mac or whatever the problem might be. You need to know specific steps. And then as you hand this over to another team to say, hey, this is a problem in a third-party SaaS service, we need to get another team to look at this, you need to let them know what you've already done. Here's the evidence we've gathered. So you're handing this on and it's natural, and they're not having to start from scratch. So yeah, so it's really good to see where this is all pulling in. And then the last thing is, ideally, we always talk about the idea of we'd like to automate our responses, because the fastest way to resolve a problem is if you've got an automated response. Absolutely. But like you said, you don't want to do any harm. So a really good scenario here to think about is if you've got an operational technology like a manufacturing plant, you can't just shut that down because you think there's a security problem. Somebody needs to go through and take out the next step of investigation and agree, yes, it is worth taking down the plant or taking down this part of the business to prevent further damage, or we may cause more damage than we prevented if we did that. So a lot of critical steps to take in this, not just from a technical perspective, but from the business decision makers as well. Cool. Good to see.
Yeah, and I think with what you just called out there, that kind of leads us into our last couple of phases, and that's the remediate and recover and post-mortem phase. On our remediate and recover, we want to think about what that remediation plan looks like. And a lot of businesses today will have something prepared, right? They'll have what it looks like to go through remediation. They'll do tabletop exercises. They'll partner with their external teams who own their lines of business. and they're working with them to understand what that remediation looks like so that they're containing that incident, they're reducing risk, they're reducing monetary risk to the business. And that's really what this is about, is the fastest that we can help get to a containment and shore that up is better to the business, better to the line of business itself, and to the revenue of that business. And so these are important things to consider on that side. So tabletop exercises here really is part of that preparation and remediation plan, conducting and testing Q&A, having pen testing exercises to drive the type of alerts and things that you're seeing in your SIM, in other security tooling posture, exercising the type of procedures that you want your analysts to follow, whether they are in-house, part of a managed service provider, and working with any external teams that are line of business owners. All of those teams should be working in conjunction one with another to understand what that remediation plan looks like so that you can effectively provide the recovery needed to get back to business and generating revenue, right? And so looking at what those results are, how to restore to normal operations, understanding once that's completed, and how to communicate incident closure, not only to the SOC, but to the managed service provider, and also closing out that incident to senior leadership, to C-level representatives within the business, and making sure that all of those pieces are buttoned down, tied down. And that really then leads out to the post-mortem piece, because this is where we're providing a collection of data, a collection of reports, things that we found, artifacts, timelines, whether or not things were resolved. Do we understand the nature of the attack? What did they want? What was their motives? All of those pieces really comes to understanding the post-mortem, because now that helps us as a line of business understand where we need to mitigate risk, where we need to put in additional monitoring, possible controls, and this levels up the maturity of our security operations overall, because it's lessons learned. We're learning from the things that worked well during that process, during those procedures, during the investigation as a whole. Where did we fall down? Where did things not go well? Did we fall down on the communication side? Were people not prepared around a remediation or understanding how to assess and contain? Where in this process did things work well and or not work well, so that we can continue to rinse, repeat, and drive to a better maturity model?
Yeah, I think this is already use case and scenario mapping, isn't it? Every SOC team has a set of use cases that they've planned for, they know about, they've got experience in. So in your experience, again, this is the kind of thing that isn't just technical, but you do also need the business involved, so the business understands how to respond and react. Sometimes the reaction can be worse than the incident itself if you fail to communicate or mitigate those things as well. So I find this is another area, and I'm not pushing too hard on the partner side, but even if you're in-house and you're doing this all in-house in your own team, this is where I find some of the other partner businesses I work with, they come in and offer the tabletop exercise you mentioned is like red team, blue team. Pen testing used to be, or penetration testing used to be once a year or once a product, a launch time, but now it's getting more like daily, weekly, monthly, continuous self-assessments and testing using this kind of framework, so you can hopefully identify these problems before they are actualized. So in your experience, Rin, how often should they not just implement this framework, but how many times should they go back through and try to test this out?
Internal at Microsoft, we did tabletop exercises at a quarterly level. You can do that more often if you feel the need. We found a good rhythm around quarterly exercises, bringing in our red teams, doing tabletop exercises. And then it really gave us the ability to test our monitoring. Were we tracking the activities of the red team? Do we see the nefarious activities that they're doing, right? They'll give us a time frame of, okay, from here to here, This is kind of when the red team could be doing activities, but they're not going to be scriptive and really kind of giving us dates, because they don't want us to do that. We have to be able to see through the noise and understand when things are nefarious, and understanding, because red teams in a tabletop exercise, we treat them like an attacker. They are a threat actor that we, look at. Now, mind you, they're internal and they're trying to make us better, but we still treat them as a threat actor, and we need to see through their activities and what they're doing and their motives, and think about it truly from a threat actor perspective. And so having that type of relationship with our red team, setting up those tabletop exercises was always important. What I loved about the way that we did it is we would then bring the post-mortem from the red team, and we'd cross-reference notes. We'd take our post-mortem, they'd have their post-mortem, and we would share where things were. And then we'd look at the differences. Oh, we fell down here. We actually didn't see that. And this was a great way for us to be able to say, we need controls in this area, or we need additional data and monitoring, or we need to shore up this procedure because we fell down during this portion of the incident response, process and procedure. Whatever the case may be, really being able to collaborate effectively with our red team helped to shore up, so that we knew going into an actual attack that we were prepared as a blue team to handle this, communicate effectively, deliver on the war room exercise, deliver the right message to our C-levels, deliver the right message to any external teams that we were partnering with, any partners that we were working with, and delivering the type of response that we knew drove down that risk to our line of business.
And I think that is one of the critical conversations that's happening today, especially the last couple of years, as we've seen the development of new technologies, new security capabilities. Obviously, Microsoft's own capabilities are growing all the time as well. Is you really have to challenge your architecture and say, the next thing we buy or invest or we spend money in, is it actually helping us do incident response? Are we discovering, detecting, and responding? And if we're not, why are we still using that technology, that product, etc.? So you should deploy it fully, but make sure it's actually doing its job. And if not, look for something else that might replace it. Which the other one that comes to in Azure Sentinel very specifically is, don't put data in that isn't helping you find something. A lot of customers will bring data into Azure Sentinel because they have always brought it into their SIM. And unfortunately, you end up spending money on stuff that isn't helping you. So these kind of scenarios and this testing and this playing around helps you understand, I don't have this data. So you need more data to come in. But if you only have so much budget, okay, what goes? What do I have to get rid of that's not helping me discover? And maybe put that into long-term storage or something that's a bit cheaper than a SIM. The SIM should be absolutely all about incident detection and then the ability to respond. So I think it's good, right? It's putting your SOC on a diet or a fitness plan. You need to be constantly ready for action, and shouldn't just be collecting for the sake of collecting.
Yeah, cool. I love that. And, when we were onboarding data, we were thinking about it, the application of that data. You called that out, right? And that application is what's so important. So many customers think, oh, I've got to boil the ocean. I need to bring in all of this data. And we thought about it prescriptively. It's, okay, I've got an organization here. What are their critical assets? What are their services and infrastructure that ties to this particular line of business? Awesome. Let's go sit down with them. Let's go build that institutional knowledge around that service. And then let's work with them to onboard that data from those assets and understand what services, and controls in place and pieces that we need to monitor. And we were very prescriptive as we would onboard organizations. And I think as we did that, that really then helped us to make sure, and we would always go back, we'd review with them, hey, is there anything that you've onboarded or that you've done that we need to consider and bring in-house that we're not already monitoring? Are there controls that you've put in place that we're not already, monitoring? What risk is there that you're still accepting that we can help you reduce that risk? What does that look like for your business? And so we took that methodology, and as we did that, we really slowly started to, whittle away the risk, and it became very a rinse and repeatable exercise that we could do, and we got really good at it. And I think if customers will think about it in that light, right, or partners, that they'll find that really is, if you can go down that path, absolutely one of the best ways to do it is to be more on the prescriptive side of the data that you're ingesting and the pieces that you're going to put in place around the monitoring and the controls.
Excellent. All right, let's take a look at these procedures then and see how we have that diagram, but the diagram's got a lot of detail behind it, right? And don't forget, you can customize all of this as well. I really love that fact that this is a great framework to get started with some brilliant field expertise in it, but you'll have your own terminology, you'll have your own views of things, and you can modify it.
Absolutely. So in here, we kind of give out a summary and a purpose and a decision matrix. Any one of these things can be modified to satisfy your business. I think the crux of this, though, is this decision matrix, and we're kind of looking at it around, right, the kill chain, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, so to speak, and what those offer you. So in this instance, we're looking around reconnaissance and attack delivery and host exploitation. We're thinking about it from hosts, from a single host, multiple hosts, whether they're high value targets. Maybe they're, multiple from the side of the house. Where do you need to apply the right severity? So we give you this out of the box. Then the other thing we do is we give a scope. We're going to give you some definitions. You may have additional definitions. Feel free to add to those definitions, right, on what that looks like. And add, kind of as a dictionary, if you will, around the incident response process. Below that, then we give you scorecards, or severity cards, I guess I should call them. These severity cards are, the way that we call these out is it kind of helps you see where to apply the right severity based on criticality. So you can see Sev 1 is critical. You can see, severity 2 is major. You can see severity 3 is moderate, and then we have minor. But each one of these gives you examples around the type of disruption that you may see within your business. So we're looking at mission critical systems. We're looking at a substantial loss of service or revenue, preventing you from being able to make sales or meeting legal or contractual obligations. Any of those things that impacts your line of business, that's a critical severity that you would want to apply to the incident that you're driving, right? But understanding that is step one. Any analyst that's doing that, either from a managed service or in-house, needs to apply that level of knowledge. And so they need to be asking questions to their business owners. Is this a Is this a critical system? Does this support, line of business apps and services? Does it support revenue generating services? Right? Asking those questions really helps to drive to the type of severity that you want to think about and the examples that are called out in these severity cards.
And a lot of this is really important as well. That language is critical for not only if you're just coming into the industry, you're new to security, maybe you've been in IT for a while, but you're new to security as well, or you're new to the whole IT industry, welcome. There's always going to be new people, and they're going to need to know what this language is. And then as you change industries, if you're in financial sector, now you're in healthcare, you go to government, everything can be different. It's the same idea. Severity is something, but the wording is really critical when you try to explain it, especially crossing the boundaries of business versus technical. We've straddled both those sides. And then if you do bring a partner in, or you do decide to bring some external forces in to help you somehow, this is a terms of reference you can go back to explain when a disaster hits, this is the stuff that makes my business run. Without it, there's no point doing anything else, right? And that's really important to know those crown jewels. I think they used to call it diamonds versus paper clips. You'll see lots of different terminology out there. And then that is the issue. If you come in with your mindset and your way of saying it, but the person next to you is thinking differently, where do you meet in the middle? So I think it's really nice to have this documented somewhere. And then I think finally, I've moved around a lot in my career. So as I move and go to another job, I always like to think I've left the last place with as good documentation from the work I did before I left and went to the next place. As you think about people moving around the industry, and security people especially like to find new and exciting challenges, you want to get the best of them out of them and documented, so that should they not be there tomorrow, the world is going to continue running. Really important things to think about, and that is where a certain level of this documentation is critical. And if you're not doing it as a procedural thing, if you're IT managers, if you're thinking about this now, really do think about encouraging your teams that this is going to help them mature their capabilities as they improve their careers, but it will also give you that stable foundation that you can adapt to different changes as it happens with people coming and going.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important to call out, is change is inevitable, right? There's always going to be change within your business, and being able to be flexible to that change and adapt to that change as it occurs, right, is critical to any business. But having a framework that allows you to be agile when change occurs, then you know how to apply right processes and procedures during areas where they may, it may be confusing because of change, but holding true to something that allows you to ground yourself, and anchor your business to, allows you to kind of wade through that change and become more agile, because now you've got something to fall back to when change occurs.
What I really like is this documentation's in Azure Sentinel, which means it's in the product you're using to do security. So it's not like you have to go find another documentation store somewhere. And the problems when I used to do ISO standards back in the day, if it wasn't date time stamped and updated on a regular basis, it went out of date really quick. Whereas if you only have one place to put it and it's inside of your security tools, you're not fishing around for it. So I see here that you've taken one of the sections of that whole diagram. I take it in the back end of this, we've got a Visio diagram or something. So if we do make modifications to the main diagram, we need to go back in and change these individual images to update that.
That's exactly right. So as we talked about earlier, we have each of those sections, right? We've got the watching and monitoring, the investigate, right? We've got the mobilize, and we have the assess and contain, and then last but not least is the post-mortem. Any one of those sections, should you change the way the workflow, the operational workflow is within the diagram, then feel free to carve that out and update this section as well. So they go hand in hand.
Great.
So in this particular area, or this section, what I've done is we've called out incident preparation, and this is to get the analyst thinking about what is needed from an action perspective to step in and drive an effective incident response. So we're looking at the different type of recommended actions that may include, contact information from team members, external team, managed service providing teams, right? Any escalation procedures with phone numbers, email addresses, Teams chats, any type of maintaining of the incident response documentation, having a war room available. We give you that capability now through Sentinel as an action, as part of the incident, that you can spin up a war room directly from an incident that you're working within Sentinel. All of that is now built in to the tool, and so it's getting you to think about how to operationalize and bring the capabilities of the features of Sentinel to bear through the operational method within this framework. So that's really what we're doing here is now we're going to carve out and talk a little bit about each of these sections in more detail. In the watch and monitor phase, this really kind of is where the SOC or the managed service provider, if you have one that is partnering with you, to strive to detect and validate any of those security events. Drive incidents rapidly, looking at infections and how those infections spread through an organization, helping to reduce that mean time to investigate. Mark and I talked about that in our first video session. Mean time to recover, we talked about that KPI as well. And understanding that those KPIs are important. Any SOC would measure by those KPIs because that reduces risk. It reduces loss of revenue, and it really shows the maturity around the capabilities here that you're building into the skill set of the individuals, and how this framework, connects the pieces of the skills, the people, and the technology. We want to bring those pieces all together. In this phase, we're really looking at the investigation phase. So we've called that out, but below here, we're gonna bring a lot more detail to this phase. So now we're thinking about category type, what actions are needed, looking at the type of things that analysts needs to note. So we talked a little bit about documentation and notes. During an investigation, an analyst should be recording their notes. Sentinel offers the comment section, recording those comments, putting in notes, adding bookmarks as you're adding additional evidence, right? Going through those processes, all of this ties in back into the investigate phase. So you're going to initiate action. You're going to look at the decision matrix. You're going to identify where the severity is regarding the incident that you're stepping into, whether it's a SEV 1, SEV 2, 3, or 4. You're going to annotate that incident, and we're going to get to that in a later session. That's going to be session 4 as we talk about the analytical processes and procedures, and that's our deep dive on this. So for now, I'm going to talk about high level, but within Sentinel, we give you the ability inside the incident to tag. And tagging is going to become very important when you annotate an incident. We're going to do that annotation through tagging. So we can add things like SEV 1, and we can add that it's been triaged. We can add that it's been escalated to a third, to an external team, or maybe that came through escalation from the managed service provider into the line of business. Whatever the directionality may be, our tagging gives us the ability to do that, and we do that through that level of annotation. We want to annotate, we want to comment, we want to build out notes. This is that operational process that an analyst should be taking day to day. When they're working an incident, that's what they're thinking. I'm thinking about the things that I need to identify from my action and my severity. I'm thinking about the things that I need to tag and annotate, and I'm thinking about the comments and the notes and the documentation, thinking about the bookmarks that I need to create. All of those pieces then start to come together. Okay, so we call that out here. They'll open the Azure Sentinel incident within the incident blade, and at a minimum, they're looking to document the following things: current status, type of alerts, an incident, looking at disruption of service, looking at, we want to make sure that they are assigning ownership, looking at summary of events on incident after the fact, right? That kind of gets to that post-mortem side. Contact information of all involved parties, system owners, system administrators, folks from both the MSSP side of the house, the line of business side of the house. Right, each of these areas are called out so that now they're thinking about that. They're making sure that they're recording that in the comment section of the incident. All actions taken by that SOC analyst should be recorded. Any additional contact information from other teams involved, and making sure that they're driving all of those notes and comments from any other incident handlers, right, that may pertain to this incident. Maybe there's a relationship between the entity type, a host, a user, artifacts, files and hashes, services that pertain. And so they want to bring that and unify that together, and they can do that through the incident graph. And then what are the next steps to be taken? Are they waiting for something to be escalated? Are they waiting for someone to pick that up and to partner? Have they opened a war room? Are they in the process of expanding out that assess and contain? Do they need to wait for a system to be reimaged or patched? What does that look like? And so documenting all of that becomes the imperative part to the overall incident process workflow that an analyst would take as they operationalize these pieces back into the incident blade of Azure Sentinel.
Very cool. Yeah, it's interesting to know what is a SEV 1, 2, and 3 as well, right? I remember it's little things like when I work on the help desk, it wasn't security, but as an anecdote, a printer not working was actually a SEV 1 because it was an airplane, and the airplane wouldn't take off if the printer didn't work, and you couldn't get the sheet of paper that said the airplane was safe to fly. So it's surprising what can happen. And the nice thing to know is that as much as we talk about incidents and analysts and reporting, we do minimize as much of this as possible by taking care of this in Azure Sentinel automatically to only bring a minimum number of incidents in the first place. So by the time they get the incident, a lot of what they need is built into it. And also all those low-lying Sev 4 and 3 type cases, we have machine learning that can look through a lot of those to see, actually, this is really complicated and you might not have picked this up as a human. So let me stitch this all together and tell you that one's actually a bit higher up than what you think it is. So yeah, very interesting dynamics.
Well, I think that is a fantastic differentiator that you just called out, right? Through Azure Fusion or Sentinel Fusion and Sentinel's Graph UI, we're graphing relationships, we're graphing additional alerts as they pertain to other entity types. So now we can see the holistic view of an incident that may pertain to other alerts by those impacted assets or impacted services. And Sentinel is really bringing all of those pieces to bear. So I love that, right? Oftentimes within traditional SIEMs, an analyst is having to stare at columns and rows of data to try and make sense of the relationship between alerts and the relationship between the entities within that alert. And are they related? I don't know. I've got to go write it down and figure it out. And Sentinel is bringing a lot of that to bear so that it's done graphically, it's done through representation, it's done through relationship building, and they're not having to guess. That guesswork is now being pulled out through the capabilities within Sentinel.
Yeah, very cool. And again, that goes back to a SOC process needs to be continually looked at to find out how many times is the analyst having to write it down on a piece of paper. That shouldn't happen anymore. That's not the way to do it. So look at that, work out what are they spending their 8-hour shift or 12-hour shift doing, and how can you just make their life easier? They don't want to have to come to work and grind away all day. There's way more important things a human being can be doing, and let the computer do that for you. Let the system do it.
Yeah.
This is great. This is really interesting stuff. All right, what's next?
Well, I'm just going to cover this at a high level. This is kind of an example of what incident information may look like. Things to consider, areas that you may want to continue to look at, right? Logs of actions, date and time, physical location if known, sources and cause, right? All of these things should be taken into consideration and should be considered as far as asking questions and thinking about it from that perspective. Looking at precursors and indicators, looking at business criticality, all of those pieces really need to be, kind of thought through, from threat intelligence. If you've got internal or external threat intelligence that's driving type of nefarious activities from a known threat actor, bringing those pieces together along with questions that you may have as an analyst really helps you make an informed decision. And that's really what this workbook is about. It's about removing the guesswork that an analyst oftentimes feels they have to do. They feel like, I don't know where to get started. I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know, who do I reach out to? Who do I talk about? Where do I gain the institutional knowledge? That's really what this workbook is doing, is it's driving home these areas to remove that guesswork so that when an analyst steps up to do that role, they really know what it is that they need to be looking at, how they can help secure their business. And that's what's so fascinating about the way that we've crafted and built this together is we want them to consume this workbook, right? It's a learning tool, just like the other learning tools that we've talked about in the previous sessions. The workbook in and of itself is a learning tool to help any analyst answer questions that they may have. Think about it from like a gaming. My son and I, we play games a lot, and we think about it from, the way that the gameplay is. And oftentimes we'll have additional questions on a character. What does a character do? How can I do this, with a skill or a status effect or something that we're doing? And it's nice to not have to wonder how to affect that gameplay. But now what we've done is we've taken the guesswork and we've really put it in a methodology that can be consumed as a learning tool for an analyst, and both from an MSSP as well as an in-house analyst as they're affecting positive change and positive maturity to the SOC operations of that business.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'd add here is that you don't want to duplicate things either. So if this is already documented somewhere else, use this to link to where the documentation is maintained. Otherwise, if you put something in here that's very unique and bespoke and custom, you're going to have to keep it updated. So again, think about where the master copy of the data should be and point to it. That'll keep you on track.
That. You know, one of the new capabilities that we're building into version 2 of this is flyouts. And so kind of think about it this way. You can imagine creating a central point of truth and linking to it in here as a flyout so that you can click it and have it fly out, fly open while you're in this area and not lose track of where you are. And so that's a new capability within workbooks that we're building into V2. And so that's going to be exciting. It's going to be an exciting new way to think about the way that this information is consumed and the way to think about how this information can then be viewed on top of each other from workbook to workbook as a flyout section. So more on that later, but that's just some of the new goodness that we're thinking about building into this as well. If the capability's there, and if they want to build into it, they could certainly do that too.
Absolutely. I don't think we're covering it here, but you can also integrate all of this with teams. So your SOC team, your engineering teams, your response teams, they can all be joining their work, saving the files, having discussions, can all be stored in teams. And again, just link between them so they know where to find this workbook versus where to go find actual documentation.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so this next portion really is around continue to monitor, right? Especially if you haven't remediated, if you've got activities that you need to continue to actively monitor, do that. You know, what documentation that you're doing within the shift log as you're transitioning from analyst to analyst, that's really important. I cannot stress that enough, that the documentation and activities that any analyst performed around an incident needs to be documented and included in the shift log so that the next person that takes over, they know what happened. They can read the report to date around that incident, and you can think of it as a precursor to a post-mortem, right? Because maybe you're not fully through the remediation process yet, and you've got a transition. That's okay. You still want to be able to do a soft handoff, and documenting the activity really allows you to do that. Along with following up on that.
Sorry, Aaron, wouldn't that be would that be in the ticketing system, or because the incident itself is managed as an incident and a ticket in a ticketing system, right? So when you talk about the idea of a shift log, is that something else like a OneNote file or a spreadsheet or some other kind of mechanism where you say, generally this is what happened on shift versus the actual incident log? How do you put those two things together?
I really like that you called that out. And so one of the sections of this workbook calls out shift logs and leveraging tools like a OneNote to store that type of activity as you're gathering all of it from the incident. I think, and some people may say, oh, well, you're duplicating. You've got, a lot of activities and data and comments and things stored in the incident itself. And then you're bringing all of that over into a shift log. Yeah, however, the shift log is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to become your post-mortem. And so you may have screenshots in there that you may not have in the incident itself under the comment side. You may have links to other documents or URLs in your shift log, right? Your shift log really is more of that documented activity. And the incident is you're just paring down to the type of activities and the things that you did in order to, call out the incident remediation process. So yeah, there's going to be an overlap, but think about them as two separate documents, because one satisfies the type of shift log while the other one is satisfying the overall incident itself and the way that you're capturing activities within that incident. I hope that
makes a lot of sense. Yeah, especially if you're the SOC manager and you have 10, 15 people in your team, the larger you get, the more people you have, you'd want to have some kind of review process. And again, this is where you're going to learn what took them so long, what steps did they take, and that's not in the incident necessarily. That information doesn't always get carried in that ticket, but the shift log would. And then if you're in a 24/7 global team, you've got teams in different countries, different time zones. and they need to have some understanding of what might have happened before they came on shift. I've been a shift worker before, and there's nothing worse than suddenly putting the headset on and everything just goes wrong. You have no idea what happened. You're like, okay, let's start again. And you don't want to do that. That's terrible. Okay, cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, love it. Absolutely. All right. Follow up on activity. We want to make sure that we're adding the appropriate response action, that it's fully executed around the ticketing, closure procedures, making sure that we're doing all of that appropriate. I mean, it pretty much is a great one-liner. Just you're making sure that you're following that. And if there are additional questions about that, you can certainly flush this out in more detail. But at a high level, we just wanted to call out the type of follow-up. Below here, we have service level and remediation objectives. So these are SLOs and notification SLOs. So we're going to have the remediation side and the notification side and general goals. So this really helps an analyst understand, like, okay, if I'm at a SEV 4 and it's not mission critical, I have 24 hours of triage, right? Like I've got time to, but the minute it moves from a SEV 4 to SEV 3, the time clock shifts, and that's important. And so a lot of managed service providers that are providing 24/7 coverage or SOC operations within a line of business, they're going to snap to a model like this, where something that you're not sure if it is a SEV 1, 2, 3, you're going to start out at a SEV 4. You're going to give yourself time to understand the nature of the criticality. You're going to be asking questions, but the minute it moves from a SEV 4 to a SEV 3, that clock starts ticking, right? Because now you've got 60 minutes to 10 minutes to immediately, right, to start to make the type of service level objective that I know I need to snap to. So as an analyst, I want to make sure I understand what my incident management goals are and what those service level objectives are, and how do I snap to those service level objectives, where I may have all the time in the world at the beginning of an incident, but that time clock is going to change by the nature of what I discover based on evidence and timeline of that evidence. So let's kind of walk through that. On the remediation SLO, we're really kind of breaking down by severity again. So it's minor, the scope is narrow, it's low. Right? When it jumps to a SEV 3 and it becomes moderate, that scope becomes significant, and it's medium criticality on the system side. You've identified evidence that points to that, right? That's when you elevate to SEV 3. Same thing on SEV 2. It's now, right, the scope could be wide. It could be high. It could be far-reaching within my environment. And then critical is that pervasive scope, with that system critical around that criticality being at a high level. I know that this is revenue impacting. I know that this is going to stop a line of business. Whatever the case may be, you want to think about it from that perspective. And then we dive in to the notifications that map to those severity service level objectives. So if I know that I've got a SEV 4, I've got my first notification in 24 hours. It's daily, or as announced, I'm going to do it over Teams or some other type of mechanism that you may deploy within your business. If I do bump to a SEV 3, now I'm notifying all SOC analysts. I'm notifying my SOC manager, right? I'm doing that also through Teams. If it does get to a SEV 2, now I'm including my incident response team. I'm moving that maybe from a managed service provider down into my local business, right, that I'm supporting. And we are making sure that they know about that. And subsequent notifications then are every 30 minutes. If I know I'm a SEV 1, this is where all hands are on deck. I'm pulling in legal team. I'm pulling in CISO, C-level, director of IT security, my SOC manager, my IR team, external teams and owners and operators that have institutional knowledge, right? It's a war room situation. I'm spinning up a war room. I've got encrypted email. I've got, encrypted teams going. I'm using all of my tools at my disposal. I'm sharing with them all of the evidence that I've gathered, how widespread it is, what critical assets it's affected. I'm bringing in those people. We're having a conversation. We're starting the dialogue, and that clock is now ticking because now we've gone from a mean time to investigate to a mean time to recover. And I'm putting in play my remediation plan. That plan kicks in, right? As we talked about that earlier, now that plan starts to take effect as I'm bringing in these additional resources, and everyone knows their part. They play a part, and we start to execute like actors on a stage. Everyone knows what their part is, and you're starting to play out your part on stage.
Don't underplay how important this is to practice either, because I can tell you from experience, the person who is probably the best person to resolve the problem the fastest is not the person you want in the room talking about it. You want them dealing with it. And if you go and take them out and get them to come and explain it to the CISO and to the executives and to the legal, and they're too busy dealing with the problem. And this is where the whole communications and roles and who does what, where and when, and timing. You will get updates, we'll put them on this portal, you'll get this information at this time, and that's what you're going to get. I've got to go and deal with the fire. You can't pull the fireman out of the fire, or else the fire's going to spread, but somebody will tell you what the firemen are doing and how good a job they're doing of it. That's the kind of things where, again, in your quiet days and when you've got time to sit back and relax, this is what you should be doing, is practicing these things.
I love that. Yeah, very well said. And I love the analogy that you can't pull the firemen out of the fire, right? They need to go fight that fire. Communication is critical at this stage of the game, but the incident responder is just as critical to making sure that you're meeting the right objectives to shore up that incident. And so both pieces have to come to bear, right? But it's got to be done in a way that is, palatable to your business and to the criticality of the situation at hand. All right, we've got a few pieces left, and then we're kind of there for the end of this session. So I want to talk a little bit about dependencies within the organization. We've talked about this high level. This can be flushed out per your business, but thinking about it from a management and team members, cybersecurity members, IT support, and what this looks like, who may have that institutional knowledge, bringing in the technical experts and the service owners, bringing in members of the information security team that may have information about the activities seen, so that they can give that information to the system owners, right? And to the technical experts that are going to help you drive that and make decisions around the type of assessment, containment, and remediation as part of that remediation plan. They need to know what you're seeing as an incident responder, and they need to share with you how they see going forward within that remediation plan. And so those pieces have to come together. We have additional incident response phases. We talk a little bit about the mobilize side. Again, this is pulling in external teams with that institutional knowledge. What they have to offer is critical because they know about those systems. They understand what those systems are doing, how they're communicating, who should be accessing them, right? What artifacts or files live on there, what systems are running on there, services, and what those services are communicating to, because they're production. They're in production, they're doing production things, they're generating revenue within a production environment. They're doing something that has a high level of impact to a business should those assets or those services be turned off. So really bringing them in to understanding the mobilize portion of the IR phase is so critical to having them as a partner during this phase of the incident response process. Along with that is that assessment and contain, right? Diving into this a little bit deeper are some of the questions that we've called out and the bullet points. Is the incident currently ongoing? What is that business impact? Is there stolen or stored information on the compromised system, right? What is the production impact? If we pull the network cable, right? If we turn it off, if it's no longer, is there a a disaster recovery process in play or a redundancy plan in place, right? So if you turn something off, is there redundancy in place so that it's not impacting business? What does that look like? What is the amount of time and resources needed in order to implement a strategy, right? That comes back to that that overall remediation plan that we've covered within this session. And then the duration of the solution. So any emergency workarounds or temporary or even permanent solutions. Maybe there are controls that need to be put into play, patches that need to be downloaded and installed. Whatever the case may be, each of these pieces needs to be talked about, considered, and then executed on once everyone is in a unified decision around what that plan is going forward.
Yeah, it couldn't take a village, right? It's a whole team effort. There's a lot of different moving parts during this and after. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so this is important. We call this out a little bit later. This is the technical root cause analysis, something that every analyst should be thinking about. They should be thinking about how to gather the technical information, how to obtain digital evidence, right? Review sequence and context of the attack, peer reviewing to similar systems that may span across the ecosystem of an environment. Look to then identify and document systemic weaknesses that are observed within the network, a host, services, communication, all of those pieces. So these are going to lead to that root cause analysis. And every C-level wants to know what the root cause was, what happened, and how do we prevent it in the future. So this is an important portion of the incident response process, is to dive deep enough to understand what that root cause is, thinking about it from these sides of the house, right? The technical information that you may need to gather, and maybe identify information that you're not collecting today. We talked about that a little bit earlier. We kind of hinted on, maybe I fell down on the alerting of this. We should have alerted on this. We didn't. Maybe on a tabletop exercise with the pen test team, right? They did some activities and we didn't collect the data because it's not in Sentinel. I can't alert on it. Right, so making sure that we have the right technical information, the right digital evidence around the systems that we're collecting, understanding all of the review of that information, all of this is critical to really dive in and understand what that root cause is so that we can go back to our C-level, we can provide that information, and it should become part of the shift log report. It should also become part of the post-mortem.
Very good stuff.
All right, last pieces here, remediate and recovery. This is kind of breaking down our tasks, breaking down a complete peer review. Having another pair of eyes is always great, right? So after you, as an analyst, have gone through and you've collected all of this, maybe taking it and giving it to a higher level analyst, right? Or to a SOC manager or to an incident responder. Have them do that peer review, review all of the activities, review the timeline, review that, make sure that nothing is missing. Conduct that remediation conference call. This could be part of the war room after you've done containment and now you're looking to remediate. This could be during that war call with your external teams, with your managed service provider, whatever that looks like within your business. Making sure that you're understanding all of the components at play, IP addresses, hosts, users, artifacts, services, communication, confirming any remediation actions. So you know what the plan is, you know who's going to execute on the remediation, you understand where that's going to take place. Is that going to fall to the service owner? Is it going to fall to, right, someone who understands the nature of the services and the communication? Whatever the case may be, making sure that you understand where that plan is in alignment, who's executing on that plan, and then documenting it accordingly. Under here, we call out remediation scenarios and options. We're thinking about general recovery guidance. This is, again, goes back to that do no harm, right? Data should be restored from a trusted source. The operating system and applications should be updated, patching, full purpose built devices. We should be consulting vendors where applicable, information on the security consciousness of the configurations, looking at configuration restoral if there was a configuration change by an attacker, applying a backup where appropriate of configurations and or data. Looking at system passwords, users that are compromised on the system, and being able to execute from that perspective. And then again, we're going back to that root cause of the compromise as determined and appropriate, and then applying those steps to be implemented to mitigate risks going forward. Last but not least is the post-mortem. And so many customers, I think, in my experience, I've been building SOCs and helping customers mature security operations for the better part of 18 years now in my career. And this oftentimes gets either overlooked or they forget to do it because time runs out. They get back to the grind of the day. Projects take over, priorities of projects, and post-mortem then kind of falls by the wayside. I cannot stress enough between the documentation of your shift log and your post-mortem, absolutely, absolutely critical and has to become part of the overall incident response process. You've got to be able to talk about the lessons learned, the questions that you've asked, and how to continue to rinse and repeat and deliver that through tabletop exercises on the blue team, red team side, with your MSSP, with your local teams that are driving from service owners and services. All of these pieces has to happen. And so picking a regular cadence that you can learn from these things and apply these post-mortem lessons back into those tabletop exercises is only going to strengthen your security posture. It's only going to strengthen the way that you're monitoring, and it's only going to strengthen the way that you're applying controls, critical controls that are protecting your infrastructure and are protecting your internal users and the data that they access on a daily basis. Well, my friends, this really kind of concludes this session of the incident response process. There's a lot of meat here, and I hope you dive into this section of the workbook. I hope you consume it. I hope you're asking yourselves questions and you're partnering with your teams and you're really thinking about all of the goodness that we've shared in this section of the workbook. But we appreciate your attendance. We appreciate you, diving into this section with us today.
So Richard, I think I've got one other question before we go and wrap this one up, which is, this is another framework. And I know that some people might be a little bit skeptical about doing another framework when there's already so much other guidance out there. So how would this compare with things like NIST CSF and the MITRE ATT&CK framework and all these other brilliant guidance that's in the industry?
I love that question. We would snap to it by understanding, let's take the MITRE ATT&CK framework, for instance. They have tactics and techniques, right? And we've done a fantastic job breaking out tactics and techniques within Sentinel's analytics, as well as within Sentinel's hunting queries. And then we've broken that down into the way that incidents are categorized across the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So now you can see where there are gaps within an attack lifecycle and tactics and techniques that an attacker uses in order to gain a foothold. So you can imagine during that post-mortem, including that level of information to help your analysts and to your business leaders understand where there may be gaps within that attack lifecycle, because now you understand that. You can see it within the way that we categorize it in Sentinel, the way that we pull that out within the Graph UI, the way we pull it out within our incidents, and then you can document that and make that part of your post-mortem. It's going to make you better. It's going to continue to drive that level of excellence that our SOC teams, I think, are looking for.
Thank you very much. Well, let's wrap this up then. So let's join us on the next video. We're going to talk about the analytic processes and procedures. Thank you, Rin. See you on the next one.